Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. Today, I'm glad to be joined by Dr. Ruth Gotian, who is the Chief Learning Officer and Assistant Professor of Education and Anesthesiology, and the former Assistant Dean of Mentoring and Executive Director of the Mentoring Academy at the Weill Cornell Medicine School. She has been hailed by the Journal of Nature and Columbia University as an expert in mentoring and leadership development, and is currently a contributor to Forbes, HBR, and Psychology Today, where she writes about optimizing success. She is also the author of one of my favorite books, The Success Factor, Developing the Mindset and Skillset for Peak Performance. Thank you for joining me today, Ruth.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Great. I love to start out each episode just giving our listeners some background on what got you interested in this subject, on optimizing peak performance.
So I've been obsessed with success for as long as I can remember. I even studied it for my doctorate. And it really started with a previous role I had where I used to run what's called a combined MD PhD program. So my students would get the dual MD and PhD degree simultaneously. And getting into a program like this, you have a 3.5% chance of admission. So you have a better chance of getting into Stanford than you do into this program. And what I quickly realized that to get into a program like this, you have to give up a lot. And you have to work really, really, really hard. And how did people who were sacrificing so much and worked so hard all of a sudden decide that they don't want to do this anymore? And I was noticing that people were leaving, and it wasn't just me noticing. Nationally, we were noticing this problem. And these people, when they finish, they're called physician scientists. These are the people who are finding treatments for some of the world's gravest diseases. And we coined this the leaky pipeline. And there were articles written about it, books written about it. All of our national conferences every year, this is what they talked about. And in 2 decades, the needle hadn't moved. And because of where I worked, I knew several Nobel Prize winners. I knew several of the leading voices in science. And I said, well, how can we get more of those people? Because research has shown that those people produce 400% more than an average person. So what if we can get more of those people? Wouldn't they more than make up for anybody who is leaving? And nobody was looking at that. So at the age of 43, while working full time and raising my family, I decided to go back to school and get my doctorate and look into it. And the first group of high achievers I looked at was physician scientists. And I looked at Nobel Prize winners and directors from the National Institutes of Health and people who won the biggest science project, the Lasker, the Breakthrough Prize winners, former surgeon generals, former university presidents. That was the original research. And over the years, I decided to look at other high achievers. So that led me to astronauts and Olympic champions and NBA champions and CEOs and senior political officials. And I realized that a Nobel Prize winning scientist is just like a bedazzled Olympic champion figure skater. And that's when I realized success could be learned.
Oh, that's a great story. Now, your book, like you stated, you interviewed astronauts, Olympic champions, Nobel laureates, high achievers. What surprised you most about them?
I always thought that success, that it was external factors that led to the success. You have to go to the right schools, be born into the right family, know the right people. But I quickly realized that what I thought and what I believed was completely wrong. And it was very much internal factors that lead to success. And that is something we have control over. That's why I really believe that success can be learned. And there were 4 elements that I found that they all had in common. But the one that really surprised me the most was that despite all of their awards and notoriety and achievements, they were constantly always looking to learn something new. And not just in their field, but also outside of their field, because they were working to make connections that other people don't yet see. And the only way to do that is by opening your mind up to new knowledge. So sure, while Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Mark Cuban read 3 to 8 hours a day, it's not the only way to learn something new. There's so many other ways to open your mind up to new knowledge, right? You can read articles, you can watch TEDx talks, you can listen to podcasts. Hopefully, people are learning something new here today. And also, you can learn from people around you, and not just those who are senior to you, not just those who look like you. And I think that's really what opened my mind up to, oh, wow, we can really do this. We can really make a world of high achievers.
That's good to know. And that brings up the question of the nature versus nurture, where if you stated that it's really internal factors, are we then stating or kind of pushing the argument for that you have to kind of be born with this?
I'm not convinced anybody wakes up in the morning aiming to be average. But I think all of the signals that we receive consciously and unconsciously are telling us to aim for average. How often have you heard words like benchmark, baseline, class average, mean scores? This is what we hear every single day. So subconsciously, we are programmed to aim for average. But I think a lot of people are not satisfied with average. They want to achieve more, but they don't always know how to go about it. So I think we each have something that is our superpower, something that we are really good at, something that we love to do, that really our entire face lights up. But we don't always know what that is. And it takes a while to figure it out. Now, there's ways that we can shortcut to that to figure out what we call in adult learning your intrinsic motivation, which is a fancy term for what is it that you're truly passionate about, right? What is it that you were put on this earth to do? Once we can tap into that, when you're faced with a challenge, you will no longer question if you can overcome the challenge. This is what you love to do. Instead, you focus on how. And you ask yourself, what is the strategy I haven't thought of yet? And I want to share an incredible story with you that I think really highlights this point. Dr. Peggy Whitson is a biochemist who worked at NASA for years. And she dreamed of becoming an astronaut ever since she saw the landing on the moon. She applied once and was rejected. She applied again and was rejected. This went on for 10 years until ultimately she was accepted. And it's a good thing she didn't give up, because ultimately she went on to become the first female commander of the International Space Station, a role she held twice. She spent more days in space than any American astronaut. And this person, whose application was rejected for 10 years, ultimately went on to become NASA's chief astronaut. You see, she never questioned if she would become an astronaut. Instead, she focused on how. So the question you need to ask yourself when faced with the challenge is, what is the strategy I haven't thought of next?
That's a powerful story. And the majority of high achievers that you mentioned in your book never had a quick ride to success. They always had to persevere. And that's a critical component of pushing yourself through the darkest hours. And I love your analogy that you had, the valence of velcro versus teflon. If you could unpack that, that would be great.
So this is a group dynamics term. So I studied adult learning and leadership. So I tried to infuse that. So people know that the book is based on research and theory, but it's all about actionable tips. But it's not just my anecdotal advice. This is based on real stuff. So in group dynamics, if you have what we call a valence of velcro, every time somebody does not respond to your email or rolls their eyes at you or turns their back to you or doesn't greet you in the morning, right? Those negative things can stick to us like Velcro. And what happens when that repeatedly occurs, when these negative things start to stick to you and stick to you and stick to you, it starts to weigh you down. And it's all you can focus on. Now, conversely, if you had a valence of Teflon, all these negative things would just glide off of you. And there's, somebody who was in the Delta forces, he said to me, the worst that can happen is somebody dies. If nobody dies, you have to just keep trying. And you can't let every negative thing stop you. You just can't. You got to move on. And I remember I was at a conference with him that one time and I said, I don't really know anybody here. And I was the queen of Velcro. Trust me, every little thing stuck to me and I would obsess over it. I would absolutely obsess over it. And then I said, I'm going to try this Valence of Teflon thing out. And I tried it for one weekend, changed my life. And now your drama is not my drama. The negative things that happen every single day, because we're all humans dealing with other humans with big personalities, it's just part of the day. It is no longer going to weigh me down. Once you start switching and making that switch in your mind, it is one of the most liberating feelings that you can have. And guess what? You're in control of that switch.
And everyone should take note of that. That's something that I think is needed now more than ever by many of the leaders. Now, there's a growing amount of articles, research, and interest in habit formation, but you take a different approach and you state it's not really about the habits, it's instead about this.
That's right. It's not about habits. You cannot copy and paste somebody else's habits into your own life. And trust me, like everyone else, I tried wake up at 5 a.m., make your bed before you do anything else, read for 8 hours a day because leaders are readers. But that doesn't work. Because what happens is if you are a night owl and you don't go to bed till 3 o'clock in the morning, how in the world are you going to wake up at 5 a.m. and be functional? You can't. Or if you have young kids to get off to school and then you have to go to work and then you come home and you have to make dinner and help them with homework, how are you going to read for an hour a day, let alone 8? So copying other people's habits means you're trying to copy their life, but you can't, because the environment is completely different. But what you can emulate are their mindsets. And that is powerful. So it's not about waking up at 5 a.m. Instead, what it is leveraging your peak performance hours. And I bet you my peak performance hours are different from your peak performance hours. Now, for example, I happen to be one of those early risers. I can get more done by 10 a.m. than I can the rest of the day, which means those early morning hours are when I do my deep cognitive work, what takes the most focus, which in my case is writing and editing and grant writing and article writing. I save the more passive tasks that don't use as much brain power for those hours when I'm a bit more sluggish, which for me are in the afternoon. It doesn't mean that you're going to be slurring your words. It just means that you are not as focused. But that's a great time to do those tasks that don't require that same level of focus. So for me, that's responding to emails, taking a look at the social media, having meetings, doing podcast interviews, always scheduled for the afternoon so that I don't eat up my peak performance hours. Because trust me, if you leverage your peak performance hours, you will get so much done during those hours that you'll have time for all those other things.
Couldn't agree with you more. It's being deliberate with that strategy, knowing when your energy is at its peak during the day and carving out time blocking, whatever you want to call it, those critical activities throughout your day.
Yeah.
So you get your MITs, your most important things done every single day. So it's about the mindset. And I like to contrast the mindset of a dreamer versus a high achiever, because I love how you do that in the book. Because I think a lot of people don't understand why they're not succeeding. It's because this mindset shift hasn't happened.
That's
so
right.
Some of the ones that I loved, and I'd love for you to kind of go into more detail about those, is, dreamers talk about what they should do.
Yep.
And high achievers, right? They don't do that.
That's right. They turn one day into make today day one. Right. And the reason I love that one is we all have things we want to accomplish. And we have these goals and we have vision boards and we have all of these things, but that's vague. That's abstract. What's it going to take to actually get it done? If you want to become a director, a VP, for example, what do you need to do? Do you need to close certain deals? Do you need to complete certain stretch assignments? Do you need to get another degree? What is it you need to do? And now what are you doing about it? Right? So if you need to get another degree, for example, have you taken the standardized test that's required for admission? Have you checked out which schools that you would be competitive for and actually submitted an application and gotten those letters of recommendation? There are certain things that are in your control, but if all it is just a dream on a vision board, there's no reality, there's no action plan. My friend Susan laughs at me that my goals fit on a 3x3 Post-it note, and it's literally just a couple of bullets. And she said, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, those are my goals to complete by 2025." She said, "They fit on a Post-it note?" I said, "Absolutely." I said, "Because these are the things I want to accomplish. And every time I'm asked to take on another task or an opportunity presents itself, I ask myself, is this going to get me closer or further away from the goal? If it gets me further away from the goal, I politely decline. If it gets me closer to my goal, then I will do it." And guess what? I just recorded my first TEDx talk. I have now completed my 2025 goals 2 years ahead of schedule.
Wow.
And it's all about being extremely intentional with the action plan.
Well, and that leads to another one that contrasts the two, is that dreamers have many unrelated goals. High achievers are laser focused on their one goal or very few goals.
There's a difference between a bucket list and goals, and you can't confuse those two. Goals are related to something that you want to achieve, something you want to get better at. And there's sub goals underneath that. So you need to figure out what those are and then push in that direction. And if you're not sure what those goals are, then you have to go back to what we discussed earlier, which is figure out where your passion is, what it is that you love doing. And I take people through what we call a passion audit to figure out what that is. And it is a 3-column exercise that asks you some pivotal questions that get you to think about things that you probably haven't thought of for a while. And it gets you to differentiate between what you're really good at and what you enjoy doing, not necessarily the same thing, right? So the passion audit is available with the book, but for those who can't wait that long, they can go ahead to my website and just download one for free. It's at ruthgotian.com/passion audit.
Great. We'll have that in the show notes as well. I'd like to dive more into this success as a moving target. And you really don't want to ask yourself what you want to do in 10 years. A lot of the high achievers ask themselves a different question, right?
That's right. So it's not about that long-term goal. And I think that we have learned during the pandemic that goals change and our purpose changes. And that's why that passion audit is so important to do when we have transitions in our lives. A new partner, a new job, a new move, a new child, a pandemic. These are all things that cause us to reevaluate what's truly important and what we enjoy doing. And that's why so many people actually left their jobs at the peak of the pandemic. So I always recommend that people do that passion audit during the transition. So what we've learned during the pandemic is that your long-term goals may no longer be relevant because you've had a transition in your life. How can your goals at 40 be the same goals you had when you were 20? They shouldn't be. They absolutely shouldn't be. That's why you always need to reevaluate. So yes, I have my goals to complete by 2025 on a Post-it note, but I also have, and a question I always ask people is, what is your next goal? And this is very important. If you are a junior person in your organization, you're not going to be CEO, right? There's about 20 steps in between. So what is your next goal? Now, what are 2, 3, 4, 5 things you need to do in order to make that next goal happen? Once you start breaking it down into these tiny little steps and you start working on those steps, you will see that you will meet that next goal ahead of schedule. And then there's another one right behind it. And that's how you become a high achiever.
I've seen it personally as well. Huge goals, long-term goals. The difference between here and there is a huge chasm, right? A distance where you start and someday where you may or may not get to. Everyone has goals, but people actually need to achieve their goals by creating routines and focus on the system, the process, building that momentum day after day, which will keep them going, right? So they can see the progress and eventually, hopefully, achieve the goal. And, this was part of the book that Jeff Hayden did with the motivation myth that I had on the podcast last year. And I completely agree. If you want to stay motivated, If you want to stay on track, it's about making progress towards the things you achieve on a daily basis. So,
yeah, one step at a time.
yep. So if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you got to go together. And you're a big advocate. And I think maybe a topic of many of your articles, and I'm not sure if you're going to be doing an upcoming book on it, is about mentoring. Because that was one thing that all the high achievers that you interviewed, or at least the majority, had in common, correct?
That's right. And that is the topic of the next book, but that won't be coming out till spring 24. All of the high achievers surrounded themselves not with one, but with a team of mentors. And this is something we can all do for ourselves. And frankly, if it's good enough for the Nobel Prize winner, it's good enough for me. And these are people who believed in that person more than they believed in themselves. Because on the road to success, you have more bad days than good days. You learn to build up that armor, right, to protect you from all those things. But you have more bad days than good days. And you need someone who will pull you out of that funk, which will happen. Now, Dr. Kathy Cram out of Boston, she said there's two parts to a mentor. There is the job and the career-related mentorship, but also the psychosocial support. And they have to be able to do both. They help you with the long-term vision for your career, but they're also your cheerleader on the side, which is what's so important. Now, it's important to also have a diverse team of mentors, because a problem that you're facing might have been solved by someone in another industry. So having a diverse team who can advise you is helpful. Now, this is not a board of directors that all needs to meet around a conference room table. They don't even need to know of each other's existence. You just reach out to certain people on your mentoring team as their expertise is needed. So for example, my mentoring team includes physicians, scientists, educators, finance people, lawyers, military people. When I wrote the book proposal for The Success Factor, I reached out to my mentor, who happened to be my former dissertation advisor. She had written several books, so she knew what a book proposal was like. And I asked her for feedback. I also asked the editor of a journal who I knew for feedback. I didn't ask the lawyer, who'd never written anything longer than a brief. But when I had to negotiate the contract, who do you think I showed the contract to? The lawyer. I don't think the lawyer even knows the other person exists, and vice versa, but you really figure out everyone's expertise and you can call on them for it. But here's the kicker. It can't be just one way. It's got to be two-way. And trust me, there is always something that you can offer somebody else. There is always something that you can help with.
Now, should the mentor usually be older or more experienced than you?
No, that's passé. That was really what we used to believe, that the mentor had to be senior to you and look like you. But there's really three levels that you need to have on your mentoring team. You need people who are senior to you. You need peer mentors who are at your level, who understand and can empathize with what you're going through. And you need people who are junior to you, because they can tell you what's up and coming that you might not even be aware of. So you want senior, at your level, and junior. And you don't only want people who look like you, because if you do that, you will be getting advice in an echo chamber. And you are actually putting yourself at a disadvantage. It's also, especially for women and people in underrepresented groups, if you're only looking for mentors who look like you, not only are you listening to an echo chamber like everyone else, there's so few people in those senior roles that if they mentor everyone who needs mentoring, they won't have time to do their own job. So you want to get that diversity of mentorships so that you can hear other perspectives. Look, I was trying to publish in a certain journal, and I actually published the article. It was about the mentoring of women during the pandemic. And I did it with one of my mentors, and he's significantly senior to me. And he's Caucasian and he's male. And the journal, something happened. There was a technical glitch. And I went from being first author to middle author. And as an academic, first author is key, right? You want to be first author. And all my emails to the editor went unnoticed. They didn't even respond. And he wrote an email to the editor, and he said, how ironic. that an email about mentoring women during the pandemic, the one female author is the one who was pushed to the middle author instead of her rightful place as first author. Within 30 minutes, that problem was solved. Unbelievable, right? Unbelievable. Now, if your listeners want to learn how to build their own mentoring team, because I created a structure for it, there's another resource that comes with the book on mentoring teams where I describe it fully, but also again, my website, ruthgotian.com/mentoring team.
Wonderful. How about when you're looking for a mentor? Can you suggest a few things we should be considering when we're trying to identify the right person to be our mentor?
So really, you want people who have project experience so that you can tap into that. You want people who have what we call the social or political capital. It's who they know, but more importantly, who they are willing to introduce you to, and also people who have skills that you want to learn. So that's why it could be people who are senior to you, people who are at your level, and people who are junior to you. You want to make sure that they have the time, that they are willing to do it, right? Because just because they are very famous or an influencer or have the Nobel Prize doesn't mean they're good mentors, right? A good mentor could be a student, right? If they have the time, if they're willing to teach you something. So you want to be able to get people who will make you better. So you need to figure out where is the gap in what you need and who can help you fill that gap. And you would be extremely surprised because these people can come from the most unlikely places. Now, you should never, ever, ever, if you remember nothing else, I want you to remember that when you meet this person, your first conversation should not be, will you be my mentor? Because now you've made it a job. Now you've made it a transaction. And I don't know about you, but I don't have time for another job. But what if you asked me and you said, Ruth, I know you've written a book. I'm writing a book. I'm stuck on writing one of the chapters and it's just not coming. And I wanted to talk to you about how you unblocked writer's block or how you did the book marketing or et cetera. Well, now it's contextual. Now you've asked me something very, very specific that I can help with because I know how long that's going to take, right? If you ask me just to be your mentor, that almost sounds like a life sentence. I don't know where we're going with this. What do you need help with? But if you can tell me something specific, that I can help you with. And the label of mentor doesn't matter. A mentor doesn't give themselves that label. It's when the mentee calls them one. And that is a label that is earned. You have to actually do something in order for that to happen. And I think coming first with somebody you have chemistry with, that you connect with, that you can offer them something before you ever ask for anything. That's how you're going to get not just one, but a great team of mentors.
Those are great points. And I've seen it where you can also test the waters before you fully jump in, right? So I found that to be effective because some support, a lot of great potential, but then in reality, it just didn't pan out. So just keep that in mind as well as that as you're trying to get these and you might want a trial period just to see if it works out before you make a longer term commitment with him or her.
Well, that's why I say, why are we signing contracts? A lot of programs, they say sign contracts. Well, why? First of all, who's enforcing the contract? But second of all, why? If it doesn't work for either one of us, either our personalities don't mesh or all of a sudden I got really busy, why do we need to have that contract? And this is another benefit of having a team. If all of a sudden as a mentor, one person doesn't work out or they're too busy, there are other people that you can call upon. So don't worry about making it formal. Don't worry about having to meet every other Tuesday at 4:00 with an agenda. What if you have a question on a Wednesday? Are you supposed to wait a whole week? Right? So you want to be able to reach out to the person when you have a question, and maybe it can be a quick text or an email that'll answer that question. Maybe they can give you something to pacify the urgent problem right now. And then we're going to have a longer conversation when both of us have time to debrief to come up with an action plan. But I gave you a solution for this watershed moment right now. So that's something you need to think about.
Great. Thank you for providing all that insight around mentoring and looking forward to that book coming out next year. Getting back to success and getting people where they want to be more successful. I think a lot of people get stuck on what they want to become. So it's too future oriented. It's not, they don't consider enough what would you like to do right now and the problems you would like to solve. So how do you get them to change that mindset to get out of this future mindset where, I want to become, like you said, the CEO, which is 20 levels above where you are right now, and get
Right.
them focused on what can I do today, tomorrow, the next week, the next month, and give them some tips around that to help them along their way.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I always tell people is what is the problem that you want to solve? And let's focus on that. And let's focus how you, in your role, can solve that, start to solve that problem. Because once you start doing that at your level, people are going to start noticing. And you'll see yourself going up through the ranks because you're solving problems that other people either don't have time to, don't know how to, don't have experience in, are not so interested in. You are taking that on. And then you start doing it at higher levels and higher levels and higher levels. So don't worry about the CEO role or the C-suite role if you are a first-year manager, right? Focus on those stretch assignments. Focus on solving problems that your boss and your boss's boss have. Because if you can do that, they will notice.
When you mentioned something also at the beginning of the episode, that they're lifelong learners, that they read
Yes.
incessantly. They're always wanting to learn something new. They're curious and they're constantly striving to make micro changes that's going to improve their performance and enhance their knowledge. And perhaps most importantly, at least from what I've seen from personal experience, they don't shy away from feedback. They crave it. They want it.
I know. Isn't
That
that
is wild
wild?
because
Because they realize that a slight change, a slight pivot can be the difference between the gold medal and no medal. So we need to start thinking of feedback the way musicians do, the way athletes do. It's not a critique, it's an opportunity for enhancement. And we need to create that shift in our head because once we start doing that, you're not telling me what's wrong. You're telling me about ways to make it better, right? You're not telling me about what's wrong with my presentation style. You're telling me about ways to be more info, which sounds better. Even if it's, for example, the way you dress, someone, I'm wearing red right now. Someone could say, oh, Ruth, I've red. That's an awful color on you. Or they can say, I think blue really makes your features pop, which sounds better, right? And we can do this for everything at every level of the organization. It's how we look at it, not as critique, but as an opportunity for enhancement.
I agree. It's something that all high achievers crave and want. The other piece of it is really the courage piece, which I think not enough people talk about. It's that it takes incredible courage and guts to be bold and courageous because as you're moving up, or if you believe in a dream and no one else believes in that except you have to be able to persevere and be
Yeah.
consistent with your efforts over a longer period of time. Like Dory Clark says, it's every now and then you need to feel the raindrops, right? Knowing that you're on the right path, moving in the right direction. But how would someone build that so that if the support's not there from their family or maybe their friends, how do you keep them on the right path? What kind of advice could you give them?
This is the hardest part because when you become a high achiever, very often you're on an island by yourself. Nobody gets it. Nobody understands. So you have to find those few people who do. And it doesn't have to be a lot of people. And this is where the peer mentors are so critical. My peer mentors are not even in the same field as me, but they can offer empathy better than anyone else. They may not understand the field that I'm doing. They may not understand the research that I'm doing, but they understand how it stings when a manuscript is rejected or a grant is rejected. And they give me, even through text messages sometimes, enough of that sparkle to get me to pick up the pieces and continue. So you need to be able to find those people who are your cheerleaders. And very often they are other high achievers. And they may not be doing the same thing as you, but they can totally empathize with what you're going through.
Definitely important. And I would add to that, that you, with the self-efficacy, is finding things in your past, your previous track record that you can rely on as well, that tells you that you can do this, you can accomplish this.
That's right. And this is where we often talk about imposter syndrome that starts to kick in because as you start to do well and you having these small achievements along the way, two things are going to happen. One, people from your old life, right, for lack of a better term, they will either become extremely supportive or extremely jealous. Keep the supportive ones. The jealous ones are going to either try to derail you or they're going to stop communicating with you. It's because they don't understand. So that says more about them than you. The other thing you may feel is imposter syndrome, where all of a sudden you might think, oh, I'm going to be found out, right? They're going to figure out that I'm a fake. That's not what it is. The reason that you're feeling that is because this is unfamiliar to you. But it's unfamiliar to you because you've never achieved this success before. So maybe imposter syndrome shouldn't be a trigger for anxiety. Instead, it's a sign of success. If you start to think about it that way, opens up a lot of windows and doors in your mind, huh?
You're right. Definitely a mindset shift there for many people in that regard.
Yeah.
In your book, you also, and I think we have time maybe for just, we'll end on this topic, but you talk about the importance of work ethic, because I feel that a lot of people give themselves an excuse to say, I'm not as successful as that person, not because I'm not willing to work hard, but just because of what was given to them, the breaks that they had, their IQ. They'd somewhat discount the work that was involved in it, maybe giving them an excuse for why they aren't as successful as someone else. From your research throughout this book, how important is work ethic?
It's one of the four elements of success because that work ethic will get you through those challenges. Remember, I told you the astronaut story that was rejected for 10 years. She was not raised with any special gifts, but she had a work ethic like nobody else. And she learned how to leverage that. And I think that's why she was ultimately accepted. And that's why she was able to achieve those incredible leadership roles of being commander of the International Space Station and the former NASA chief astronaut. It is that work ethic. It is that resilience. It is that grit, whatever you want to call it, that will get you to go through challenges where you are in control. So it never becomes a question of if you will overcome the challenge. Instead, the focus will be on how to overcome the challenge. What is the strategy I haven't thought of yet? Look, you can't just prepare, you have to over prepare. And as they say in the military, train hard, fight easy.
Wonderful. Great advice. And I think that gives everyone hope that they can achieve the level of success that they would like if they're willing to put in the effort and the work in order to do it, along with having these mindset shifts that we talked about throughout this episode. As we close today, is there one or two things that you could share with our listeners that they could do right away? Maybe the first thing they could do if they really want to elevate their level of success.
First of all, with the four elements of success, you have to do all four simultaneously. But if you're going to start with one, I want you to figure out where your intrinsic motivation lies. What is it that you are good at and you love to do? And you would do it for free if you could. You can't not do it, right? This is why you were put on this earth. So I think that passion audit that I talked about is really going to be helpful for everyone. And I think if you start there, you're going to see everything shift. Because next, you're going to come up with an action plan as to actually how to do something with that. And you're going to beat your goals.
Wonderful. Thank you so much today for joining me, Ruth. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
Sure. I am on all the social media. Go check me out. Just my name, Ruth Gotian, Gotian. And my website is ruthgotian.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to share with others and post about it on social media. You can also go to our YouTube channel, which has video recordings of all the episodes of this podcast, along with bite-sized segments called single servings that are designed to answer your most pressing leadership and management questions. Remember, until next time, it's not what you know that counts, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.